So I'll go ahead and I'm just going to read a little bit of your bio. We have Leah here, one of the dynamic duo lead singers of the Rising Appalachia. Rising Appalachia brings to the stage a collection of sounds, stories, and songs steeped in tradition and a devotion to world culture, intertwining a deep reverence for folk music and a passion for justice. They have
Mm.
used their life's work to sing songs that speak to something ancient yet surging with relevance. And that is why we have Leah on this interview today, because I want to talk about sacred activism. I feel like, we're in these turbulent, chaotic times of transformation and shift change, and people are freaking out on some level. Some are freaking out, some aren't, and there's people who are wanting to stand up and fight and do something to make a difference. And one of the things that I'm personally noticing is sometimes there's groups that are coming anger against anger or shadow with shadow, and it's clashing, and then it's sort of creating a more of a damage ripple effect. And what I would like to see is that sacred activism piece, where it's like the Martin Luther King, where love
Mm.
love is the way, and having compassion and doing your own shadow work and being aware of your own unhealed wounds when you're going out there, because if there's unhealed stuff in you, you're going out to fight, you could cause more damage to yourself. And so how can we be in radical self-care, and what are the real practical ways to rise up and speak up? And I don't know if you've heard of this book. He even
I haven't.
one Activism,
Mm-mm.
Sacred Activism. I haven't read it yet, but I didn't even know there was this term. Like 7 years ago, I was working at a nonprofit. They were against the war, and old
Mm.
hippies and protesters and all of that. And I was like, I think we need to bring some sacred activism in. And then later found out there's a whole movement around it. So
Right.
yeah, so thank you for your time, and I would love to hear
Yeah.
from your perspective, anything you want to say around this. But what does sacred activism mean to you? And in your travels all over the world, what are you learning? What are you gathering? What is it that your message that you would like to share
Hmm.
today?
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So let's see. That's a great question. I think what sort of stirred up in me just hearing you talk about it is it really, my background is very much in activism and in radical theater and in protests and in environmental and social human rights work. And it's felt for a long time like there's sort of two worlds that it's split, and there's one that is very protest based and activism based, and it's almost a martyrdom, and it is, at all cost we're going to fight the fight, and we're going to go to battle. And it's kind of using that same terminology that is in our sort of war-ridden culture, that we've got to fight the man and fight the issue and fight the loggers. And I think that there is a place for that, and there's a lot of value in that. But that community often tends to have a high rate of burnout. People fight and fight and fight until they're exhausted and they get sick, and their home life falls apart, and then they step away from it and say, okay, I can't win, so I'm going to step away, and I'm going to go back into normal life. And that's really, I think, its own tragedy, because we lose a lot of people who are big believers in change because a fighting mentality isn't where. I don't think that we're going to win in that way, and then on the whole other side of the spectrum, there's this really interesting culture that is very bliss chasing.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, I've got to do self work, and I've got to take care of myself, and if I can take care of myself, then everything else is going to be fine. And actually, I need to make sure that I only touch the purest food, from the deepest center of the Amazon, and I'm going to go to my 9,000th breath work course, and I can't be bothered with negativity. And you sort of see on that side of the coin that there's really not a relationship with the intense, despairing injustice of reality, and it's very perched up on privilege, and in a way a little bit on some denial, and the two are so far apart. They're really far apart from each other, and I think a long time ago we got involved in the Rising Appalachia world around the idea of spiritual activism and sacred activism, and also personal care and health and wellness, and seeing those two really engage with each other. And my humble opinion, is that you need them both. You really need to be able to take care of yourself and know where you've reached your limit and step away and get rest and restoration. And you need to be able to go into places that are uncomfortable and that are ugly and that are wounded, and be able to stand in those places in service, and really work in some of the big issues that we're facing, and that can be violence prevention, that can be homeless shelters, hospice care. There's so many places where people can bring a lot of service and a lot of love into those spaces, and be in service, and I really think they need to merge those two worlds, and that to me would be a concept of sacred activism, that you have in balance both the care for self, and also the hard work and the discomfort of looking at our society's big injustices, and knowing even if those injustices don't touch you directly, you can use that power and that privilege to work against injustice. So
absolutely. So what would you say spiritual sacred activism means to you? Define it. It's such a broad term, right?
It is a broad term. Yeah, I think it might just mean that to me, that your activism is in the very wide range, looking at injustice in the world, and that can look very different for different people. And in a very personal way, there's also care and personal work. I think I'd have to work on getting it down to like a 2-sentence cliff note, but I think that's what it is for me, is really having a balance between those two. And I think martyrdom doesn't work, and we can't lose all of our activists because they exhaust themselves, and getting lost in just your own personal process is also, I think, a real disservice to the community at large. So I don't know how I'd distill that into a one-line answer, but that's what it entails for sure.
Well, I know here in Asheville, there's a group that's I'm a part of it. I think it's the Community Roots Movement. There's lots of different names for it, but they have a team now on their activist team that is doing the spiritual side of it, that goes in and does the prayers and the offerings and the clearings, and then later offers healings to those who are on the front line, which I'm really impressed with that here in Asheville. It's really a progressive idea. It's probably maybe been going on longer than I'm aware of, but
yeah. We were also part of a really interesting organization that's not around anymore, but it was many years. It was called the Stone Circles, which was in Eastern North Carolina, in the Raleigh-Durham area, and it was a community that was committed to creating respite for the activist. So sort of bringing people in after they had been on the front lines, and creating a space where they were in silence in the mornings and able to walk in the wilderness and eat together and have a really nurturing, sacred space. And that was their idea, was to have a place to return for the hard work of activism in many different ways, and actually nurture those people that are doing that work. And it was really I know that it fed a lot of people's souls. So I think that idea would be really cool to explore and reintegrate into our communities, you know, as places of respite specifically geared for people who are doing very hard work, you know, and there's a lot of categories of what that is. So very hard social and economic and, you know, environmental justice work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love that idea. Kind of brings tears to my eyes a little bit to think about like holding that space and yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. So in your travels, what have you picked up on or noticed from being outside of the US? You know, like
Oh,
I had
yeah.
a, yeah. What are
It
you?
was just great. It just makes you realize how damaged our culture is, just, you know, right out of the, whatever that term is, right out of the gate, you know. It's like, I interrupted you, so you had thoughts on
Oh no, no.
international culture.
Yeah, well, you've been to some really high places, but I did have a friend who she's a photojournalist and traveled to Syria, and she grew up very privileged, and even being over there, she really reflected on her privilege of being a white American woman, and
Mm-hmm.
it took her like weeks to come back and to like come back into this culture and to really settle down with like, whoa, the privilege that she has as
Yeah,
a white educated woman. And
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think if I could have a magic wand version of things, you know, international travel would be mandatory to graduate from high school. You know,
Yeah.
I think that I think the United States in particular is a very, very big country, and the borders are very tight, and the language diversity is very limited. And I think that in and of itself makes our sort of nationalism a little bit dumbed down, and our understanding of how big the world is and how many different perspectives there are. It's not even the fault of anyone, but if you don't have interactions with other cultures, other religions, other climates, you know, other environments, especially other languages, then
Mm-hmm.
how are you going to know how how broad the world is and how limited the perspective is of the United States? I mean, we do have a lot of diversity, but culturally, you know, you don't have access here to a lot of real deep different institutions and religions, and I've always thought that would be really an amazing part of graduating from high school, from, you know, not from college, from high school, to just become an adult. That would be a mandatory step, and
Mm-hmm.
that's probably a long way from ever actually entering into our public school systems. But you know, I started traveling when I left the country at 18. I moved to southern Mexico, and I spent the duration of my early 20s living in Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I spent 8 months in India. Um, you know, I spent literally years between southern Mexico all the way through Central America and into Colombia. And I never thought that I would come back here to the States. And, you know, I really felt much more at home in the diversity of a global community and in an international community. And I did. I came home. And when my father wasn't doing very well, I think I was maybe about 26, 25. And that year I came back to support my family, and I felt very culture shocked. I've said that for many years. I feel like I will never quite be fully at home here from living abroad at that age, when it was really got into my muscle memory. But I came back to support my family, and my sister came back from her own travels, and that was the year that Rising Appalachia started. It was the year that we came back, and then very slowly we had you know, a big purpose in participating in the retelling of the American story and participating in the retelling of the Southern narrative in particular. And so that's been, it's been a really interesting path for me personally to have not planned on coming back, and then to have come back and found a purpose that is both really sort of insurmountable and impossible, but also really inspiring to be part of retelling the story. So that's a long-winded answer, and
yeah, no, but it's part of, thank you for sharing that. I can relate to going down to Mexico, and I went down for just a summer in college, and I cried so hard when I had to come home. I did not want to leave.
Yeah, totally.
I was like, a month is not long enough.
Right. Where were you?
Querétaro. I probably don't pronounce it right. It was right south of or north of Mexico City, and I just fell in love with my host family, and I've always wanted to travel more, but and felt the same way. Like in college when I started studying cultural anthropology, because I didn't have the money to travel, being from Kentucky, and my family, my mom worked in a factory, so there was no travel.
Right.
But I was different than them, and to have be the first to get an education, and to see in the books about other cultures, and it just changed my life for sure, and changed my perspective that, whoa. And then I thought everyone needs to take either travel, like you said, or take cultural anthropology courses to understand other cultures and understand why they behave the way that they behave. And which kind of brings you back to that sacred activism piece. To understand the way someone behaves, you can find that compassion, and understand that even like, I think Maston Kipp says, he sees Trump as a wounded man, and
totally
a little boy in a man's body, and and to just, instead of hating him or hating his supporters, finding the compassion and the love, and building bridges so that we can come together.
Right.
And so before we go, because I don't want to take up too much of your precious time, is there anything that you would like to share as far as call to action that you'd like to see people take, or a change that you would like to see happen in American culture? Or
there's so many. There's so many, but I would say one thing that was so interesting in our last tour, we toured in Europe. We haven't been to Europe for a while, but we toured in Europe, and it was wonderful to be connected to a lot of the cultural ancestry and traditions that come out of the European continent, which it also has a very long and wounded history with their own oppression and uplift and poverty and the stories of the people. But what we noticed very, very quickly, almost everywhere we went, was how many people still talked to each other in the old, I hate to say the old-fashioned sense, that you go to the airport and it was noisy because everyone sat together and spoke together, and you go to a festival and get your cell phone out to take a selfie and look around, and there's 150 adults and no one has a phone on them, and a really, that's a very small call to action, but at the same time, I feel like a big part of the American struggle right now is that all of our bubbles are shrinking and our boxes are shrinking. And how often do we ride public transportation anymore, or go to the grocery store and spark up a conversation with somebody we don't know? And I feel like our ability to really understand one another and know our neighbors and meet new people is really dramatically shrinking, and our sort of addiction and obsession to our devices was just noticeably different. And Chloe and I spent a long time talking about it, and we're guilty as anyone, but trying to figure out how to limit our relationship to all these devices and all this stimulus, so that we can actually be present in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our transportation, and in our markets, and all the rest. And so in a really small way, you know, I think a call to action would be for each of us to figure out how to limit that screen time, and really continue to engage with the world, you know, with eyes and spirit, and conversations that are to face. And I think that has a lot to do with this whole current political thing too, is that there's so much isolation between the opinions and the sentiments of people. And, you know, conversations could go a really long way, you know, especially in an area like Asheville, where it's sort of a liberal community and an enclave of old Southern poor mountain communities. And, you know, those conversations would go a really long way, I think, to foster people understanding each other. And they may not agree with each other, but just to even know each other, you know, and say, oh, okay, my old timer neighbor, you know, his feelings about this is from these experiences. And I think it would be amazing to encourage all of us to try and have a few more conversations with random strangers, and just see where that got us. So.
Oh, I love that. You gave me goosebumps several times. It's like,
Yeah.
what a simple call to action, but yet very profound, because it's about building connection and relationships and reestablishing harmony and building bridges.
Yeah.
When I first moved to Asheville, I had the neighbor that I had brought me a pie, and I was shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, am I in the Twilight Zone? My neighbor brought me a pie. That's the sweetest thing ever. And
Totally.
they totally have different beliefs. They're totally a part of fundamental Christian Southern culture, but that was just so beautiful and so loving, and non-judgmental and accepting and inviting and welcoming. And
Right.
I agree, you know, like, I'm intentionally leaving my phone at home and going and meeting people at the coffee shop and having real connection, because I think we try to fill these voids of loneliness, and then we're creating this narcissistic society of selfie and an illusion of connection, and then forgetting how to really connect. So thank you. I think that's
yeah, totally. And we can all, you know, we're kind of like kids in the candy store. We're sort of part of a culture now with technology that nobody knows how to have discipline with. I mean, we weren't taught this, and I imagine in the next generation they'll be taught discipline in in elementary school, how to not be addicted to your devices. But we're kind of figuring it out on our own, and I think it takes sort of navigating and refusing to just go down that sort of tunnel of instant gratification and you know, at all times stimulus. So
right.
It's an interesting little thin line to walk.
Oh yeah, and I'm a mom of a middle schooler with a phone, so
Nice.
oh gosh, the phone is new, and it's been interesting, you know, like I finally said, you know, I think at 8:30 we have to set it outside your bedroom, because she doesn't have control. And her and her friends will get on group Snapchats and be up all night. All night.
I cannot actually imagine
They have no
version of it.
I would have had control when I was 12. Oh yeah, my friends, like,
exactly.
Their tribe means everything to them at that age.
Yeah, totally.
It's everything.
Yep. So. My dad used to take our phone. I mean, we just were on the phone, you know, and he used to take the phone plugged into the wall, and at dinner hour, he would take the phone and he would put it in the freezer. And he would take it off the hook and put it in the freezer, so that when it would do the like beep, 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 beep noise, and that meant anybody that called got a busy signal. And he'd put it in the freezer for an hour and a half while we had dinner at the table. and told stories, and it drove us crazy. And as soon as he gave us permission, we'd be like, okay, and we'd grab the phone and be frozen, and we'd hold it and call all of our 5 million friends. So it's
Yeah,
just
call
part of
waiting.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
part of it. And I guess we just have to like find new strategies for limiting it,
Oh yeah.
and I
Dinner
think it's
table,
worth it.
no phone.
Dinner table, no phone.
No
But
phone.
yeah, after 8 o'clock seems like a pretty reasonable idea. Make sure you sleep. So
Yeah, they say
which
the blue screen will mess with your serotonin levels
Mhm.
at a certain.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay,
And I
before
think it
we go,
does.
is there anything else you'd like to share from your heart and your soul? You've shared a lot. I really appreciate you and your time.
Well, yeah, well, we start back up on tour in like 3 days or something. So
Oh, wow.
we'll be on the West Coast. Send your people and your friends, and we're excited to be making more music.
Yay, West
Doing,
Coast.
yeah, doing our job, gathering people and getting them out of their houses and out of their devices, and putting them for a few hours on the dance floor.
Yeah. What, do you have any time in Asheville you'll be playing?
We don't have a show scheduled yet, but we've been working on when that will happen.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.